The night of August 25, 2020, in Kenosha did not begin as a mystery, but it would become one. Layered, chaotic, and endlessly debated. Because in the shadow of the police shooting of Jacob Blake, the city had already transformed into a flashpoint, where protests against police brutality merged with anger, fear, and uncertainty.
And as daylight faded, the streets filled with demonstrators, journalists, law enforcement, and something else: armed civilians.
Who claimed they were there to protect property, defend businesses, and restore order where they believed the system had failed. Among the many people who drew public attention during the events was a 17-year-old teenager whose actions would later become the subject of intense national debate.
With an AR-15 style rifle, would ignite a sequence of events that no one present that night would ever forget.
And as he walked through the streets, dressed in a green shirt, baseball cap, and medical gloves, carrying both a rifle and a first aid kit, the contradictions of his presence were impossible to ignore. Was he a helper, a protector, or something else entirely? Because in a city already brimming with tension, perception mattered as much as reality, and every movement, every glance, every interaction carried weight. And as the hours passed, those perceptions began to collide in unpredictable ways, creating a volatile atmosphere where a single spark could trigger an explosion.
And that spark would come in the form of confrontation, confusion, and ultimately, gunfire.
But to understand how that moment unfolded, you have to step into the chaos of that night, where nothing was linear and everything was happening at once. Where the sound of shouting blended with sirens.
Where flames from burning debris flickered against the night sky, casting shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own.
Amid the rapidly unfolding events, the teenager was seen moving through crowded streets during the chaotic nighttime atmosphere, at times standing guard outside businesses, his presence both welcomed by some and deeply unsettling to others. Because in a protest environment, an armed individual is never neutral, and whether intentionally or not, his rifle made him a focal point, a symbol, and perhaps even a target. And as midnight approached, the tension reached a breaking point, and it began in a parking lot near a car dealership. During the unfolding events, the teenager encountered another individual, leading to a sequence of moments that would later receive extensive public and legal scrutiny.
With witnesses describing him as agitated, confrontational, and unpredictable. But in that moment, labels didn't matter.
Only actions did, and what followed unfolded in seconds, yet would be replayed endlessly in slow motion.
His video footage showed Rittenhouse moving through the lot, Rosenbaum pursuing him, voices shouting in the background.
And then, a gunshot rang out from elsewhere, a detail that would later become crucial. Amid the confusion and noise of the rapidly unfolding situation, a confrontation escalated within moments, becoming a central focus.
And Rosenbaum fell, fatally wounded. The first life lost in what would soon escalate into something far more complex.
And for a brief moment, there was confusion. A pause in the chaos as people tried to understand what had happened. The situation continued unfolding rapidly as people moved through the streets amid confusion, noise, and growing panic during the chaotic night. And in an environment already charged with fear and anger, those words acted like fuel on a fire. The rapidly unfolding situation drew increasing attention from people nearby, as confusion and tension continued spreading through the crowded streets.
The situation spiraled further out of control, because perception had now shifted. He was no longer just another armed individual.
He was seen by many as an active shooter, and the crowd's response reflected that belief. As individuals moved to stop him, to disarm him, to confront him, and then came the moment that would define the entire case. The moment that would be analyzed frame by frame in courtrooms and media platforms. Because as Rittenhouse ran, he stumbled and fell to the ground. And in that instant, everything changed.
Because now he was vulnerable, surrounded, and the crowd was closing in. And among those who approached,
several individuals soon became directly involved in the rapidly unfolding situation, as confusion and uncertainty continued to intensify around the scene. What followed happened extremely quickly, yet the events continued to spark discussion and public debate long afterward.
During the rapidly unfolding confrontation, a physical struggle occurred within seconds, becoming one of the most heavily examined moments of the case.
Moments later, another tense encounter unfolded nearby, adding to the confusion and intensity of the rapidly developing situation. Moments later, the immediate chaos in the street began to settle, as people stepped back and the tense atmosphere shifted into shock and confusion.
Walking away from the scene with her hands raised, moving toward police vehicles, a surreal end to a sequence
that had begun with tension and ended in tragedy. And yet, even as the physical events concluded, the story was only beginning, because what followed was not just an investigation, but a national reckoning, a legal battle that would expose deep divisions in how Americans interpret self-defense, protest, and the right to bear arms. And as the case moved to trial, it became clear that this was not a simple matter of guilt or innocence, but a complex puzzle shaped by perspective, context, and the interpretation of the law, particularly Wisconsin's self-defense statute, which allows the use of deadly force if a person reasonably believes it is necessary to prevent imminent death
or great bodily harm. And the entire trial would revolve around that single concept: reasonableness.
Because what is reasonable in a calm environment may not be reasonable in chaos. And what one person perceives as a threat, another may see as an overreaction. And as prosecutors and defense attorneys presented their cases, they constructed two entirely different narratives from the same set of facts, with the prosecution arguing that Rittenhouse had provoked the violence by bringing a rifle into a volatile situation, thereby forfeiting his right to claim self-defense, portraying him as someone who inserted himself into danger.
And then used lethal force when confronted, while the defense countered that Rittenhouse was acting within his rights.
That he had attempted to retreat, that he had been chased, attacked, and placed in fear for his life, and that each shot he fired was a response to an immediate and credible threat.
And as video evidence was presented, the courtroom became a theater of analysis, with each frame scrutinized,
each movement interpreted, each sound examined for clues about intent and perception. And the testimony added complexity, with witnesses offering conflicting accounts, experts debating the significance of key details, and perhaps most notably, during the courtroom proceedings, witness testimony and detailed questioning became central to the public discussion surrounding the case.
"I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth." A moment that would become pivotal in shaping the jury's understanding of the threat Rittenhouse faced.
Because it reinforced the defense's argument that the situation was not one-sided, that danger existed on multiple fronts. And then there was the decision by Rittenhouse to testify, a move that carried significant risk, because it opened him up to cross-examination, but also allowed the jury to hear directly from him.
To see his emotional response, his account of fear, confusion, and the split-second decisions he claimed to have made.
And his testimony, marked by visible emotion and moments of breakdown, became one of the most talked about aspects, with reactions ranging from sympathy to skepticism, further illustrating how deeply divided public opinion had become. And outside the courtroom, the case took on a life of its own, dominating headlines, fueling debates across social media, and drawing commentary from political figures, activists, and legal experts, each interpreting the events through their own lens, turning the trial into a broader conversation about race, justice, and the boundaries of lawful self-defense. And as closing arguments approached, the stakes were immense, because the jury was not only deciding the fate of one individual, but also setting a precedent, sending a message about how the law applies in situations of civil unrest.
And when deliberations began, the nation watched anxiously, aware that the outcome would likely spark strong reactions.
And after days of deliberation, the jury returned its decision, acquittal on all counts, and the response was immediate, with some viewing it as a validation of the right to self-defense, and others seeing it as a failure of the justice system. And the reaction extended far beyond Kenosha, reflecting broader national divisions that had been building for years. And in the aftermath, the case continued to be analyzed, not just as a legal proceeding, but as a cultural moment, a case study in how perception, media, and law intersect in the modern age. And as time passes,
the questions raised by that night remain unresolved, lingering in public discourse. Because the Kyle Rittenhouse case is not just about one night,
but about how a society defines justice in moments of chaos. Truth remains contested. What do you believe?